Welcome, everyone. Red mic, is it? Okay. And I'm going to err on the side of caution by mentioning to you that I feel really good, and I'm 90% sure I'm fine, but my colleague Bob Palama got diagnosed with COVID, and there was a pastor gathering at his house Sunday night. We were outside and at a distance, but on Wednesday night, he and his wife started to feel sick. So I'm going to just stay distant. Jason will have his own story to tell you, but that's why Terry will be the microphone guy tonight, and that's how we're going to proceed. Let me offer an opening prayer, and then we'll hand it over to Jason. Let's pray together. Gracious God, we thank you for yet another beautiful Sunday. We thank you that we can gather again to listen to you and also to listen to one another and have a dialogue together. We thank you for Jason and for the 2 good Sunday evenings we've had with him so far, and for his willingness to come back from a good time up north and join us yet again tonight. We pray for your spirit as we think about how to recognize your image and the dignity of each human being, how to welcome one another as you have welcomed us to your glory. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
No. Test 1. No? All right. Thank you for letting me come the last few Sundays to be here to talk about immigration. I appreciate it, and we'll wind it up today by hopefully giving some practical ways we can think about the issue and ways that we can get involved in the issue. My story is that my youngest daughter was taken to urgent care this morning, not feeling well. So she is getting a test herself. My wife is also getting a test tomorrow morning, so I'm also going to err on the side of caution and stand up here. I'm great, and I was gone, but anyway, so even afterwards, I'll probably just slip out of here, and we can talk some other time. But we want to conclude the immigration talk by really kind of focusing on what are some practical steps forward. Last time we had some really good questions. I said I would do some research, so I emailed James Skillen. He sent me a big long email back. So I'm not going to read the email, but when we get to the question and answer time, I can kind of share some of the insights that he gave on principled pluralism and how he sees that fitting in with our politics today. So I'll save that for a little bit later. But so I called tonight's title, Do Right. So if we can flip the slide. We've been looking at 1 Peter. Am I still? Okay, so I just need to yell or what? Yeah. Okay. So we've been looking at 1 Peter chapter 2. And I know you can't read it from there very well, so I'll read it to you. I just put part of the text up there this time. For the Lord's sake, accept the authority of every human institution, whether of the emperor as supreme or of governors, as sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to praise those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing right you should silence the ignorance of the foolish. As servants of God, live as free people, yet do not use your freedom as a pretext for evil. Honor everyone, love the family of believers, fear God, honor the emperor. So last time, we talked about how the honor everyone and honor the emperor was really a subversive kind of play on Peter's part. We're back. Okay. He's taking the emperor, who's divinized, and pulling him down. Honor everyone. Kind of de-divinizing we talked about last time. And if you remember, I put up a slide last time with a Trump sign and a Biden sign talking about how we seem to have re-divinized our politics. And we're stuck in these ideological camps. So how do we de-divinize? How do we honor everyone and honor our politics and honor our political leaders, those whom we vote for, or those who are running for office? First, as Christians, seeking the good. So today what we're focusing on is this idea of by doing right. right? To do good, to do right. And I've been making making the case, and I know I don't have to make it very hard for most of you, that politics is a creational good, and that we should be engaged and involved in politics, and that right now in this time of cynicism and this time when it seems that people are running away from it, now is the time, I think, for us as the Christian community to get involved. And we're going to look specifically here at the issue of immigration, and I want to get to some practical things, because the question is, how do we make change to our immigration system? Or maybe even a better way of thinking about it is, what is really the problem here? What needs to be changed? So if you go to the next slide, one of the things we talked about last time was the immigration law of 1965. And what that did, it was actually seen as a very positive thing, because before there were quotas from, different countries and so on, and we would privilege some countries over others, and this did away with those quotas. And what it did is it created 3 primary immigration streams: family reunification for U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents or green card holders, right? So families who are going to get reunited is one stream. Employment needs, labor, is the second stream. The third stream is asylum and refugees. Now, the most common one now is the family-based or the employment-based. We'll talk about asylum here in a little bit. That's actually a place I think we as a Christian community need to start raising our voice. One of the interesting things about this, and I'll show this in a few slides later on, is one of the things that this law did, for all the good that it did, and it was hailed as a great thing, because we now had immigrants coming from Africa and Asian countries and countries that really had a hard time immigrating before this. But for the first time, it put limits on immigrants from the Western Hemisphere. It used to be that you could be a migrant worker in Mexico, and you could live in Mexico, and then go across the border for a period of time, get work, have your family maybe even come with you, or maybe your family would stay behind. You would work for a while, and then you would go back. This begins to make that much more difficult. And in fact, I'll show you an article that was written in 2015 by somebody from the Washington Post, who said that this law, the 1965 law, which had good intentions, has created the illegal immigration issue as we have it today. Okay, next slide. All right. So as we think about the family-based immigration system, these are the categories, and these are the number of people over here that are allowed in. So, Category 1, immediate relatives of U.S. citizens who are adults, spouses, unmarried minor children, and parents. There's an unlimited number of people who can come and immigrate to this country. Then you get into these preferences. Number 1, unmarried adult children. You have a number, 23,000, right? And you can kind of keep going down. Legal permanent resident, that's what LPR stands for. Spouses and minor children, 87,000. Unmarried adult children for legal permanent residents, 26,000, right? And as you kind of keep going down, U.S. citizen adult children, and then the last one is U.S. citizen brothers and sisters, 65,000. Great, go to the next slide. Here's how long each of those channels takes. The first one, immediate relatives, 9 to 12 months. Tier 1, 6 years. Tier 2, 9 to 10 years. 3, 8 years. 4, 12 to 15 years. This whole idea of chain migration, by the way, really isn't a thing. I mean, family members do come, but look at how long it takes to do it the right way. And we're talking about families. We're talking about children of legal permanent residents, citizens. This is how long it takes for them to come the right way, for them to get in line, right? Next slide. The employment channel. Go to the next slide. All right, you can't read this again because the print is pretty small, but these are the preference categories. And here are the numerical limits over here. Category number 1. So this is the category, the highest. This is what we really want. Persons of extraordinary ability in the arts, science, education, business, or athletics. Outstanding professors and researchers, multinational executives, and managers. 40,000 people. Tier 2, members of the professions holding advanced degrees or persons of exceptional abilities in the arts, science, or business. 40,000. Tier 3, skilled workers with at least 2 years of training or experience, professionals with college degrees, or other workers for unskilled labor that is not temporary or seasonal. Now, for the skilled workers with 2 years of training or professionals, the number is 40,000. For the unskilled, look at the number. You probably can't see it. We're talking 5,000. 5,000 is it. Number 4, certain special immigrants, including religious workers, employees of U.S. Foreign Service posts, former U.S. government employees, and all other classes of aliens, 9,940. Number 5, persons who will invest $500,000 to $1 million in a job-creating enterprise that employs at least 10 full-time U.S. workers, 9,940. Now again, we say, why don't they do it the right way? Why don't they get in line? The problem is, when we think about many of the immigrants who are here in Northwest Iowa, many of them, and I realize this is problematic, I'll put it in air quotes, are unskilled. Now, I think the work they do actually takes some skill, but they're classified as unskilled labor. So to come the right way to immigrate to this country is 5,000 people that they will take in that category. All right, next slide. I'm not going to read this to you, but it gives you all the different temporary visa classifications: religious workers, H-2B, H-2B, all of these different kinds of temporary visas that can be used for people to come over temporarily for work. Okay, next slide. Man, that really got tiny, didn't it? Wow. All right, so here we have H-1B, who's eligible? Certain foreign professionals as specialty occupants. Numerical limits, 65,000 per year. H-2A, agricultural workers from certain designated countries, no annual limit. H-2B, seasonal, non-agricultural temporary workers, 66,000 per year, right? So there are ways in which people could come in a temporary way to get work by getting visas. Now, one of the issues that's happened during this time of COVID, but the time it's taken for these things to get processed and the number that have actually been processed has been going down. All right, next slide. All right, asylum channel. Now, I have tried really hard to, hopefully you've seen that I've been nonpartisan. As we think about the issue of immigration, we could criticize the Obama administration in a lot of different ways, and we can criticize the Trump administration. Now, this is a place where the Trump administration has purposefully lowered the number of asylum seekers and refugees that we take into this country. The person who sets the limit each year is the President of the United States. And the President of the United States is supposed to do it in conversation with Congress. Each year President Trump has been in office, the number has been brought down to where we are right now at the lowest it has ever been. Next slide. All right. This is for refugee, let's see, I'm trying to remember. This is from the White House, Presidential Determination of Refugee Admissions for fiscal year 2020. This is the number of refugees and asylum seekers the President has decided that we will allow into this country. And you can see that the number is 18,000, which is way down. Now, last couple of years, I think it was 30 at one point. Under President Bush, I think it was up in the 70s, 70,000. And as we think about Robert Ray and Ford, we talked about in the 70s when we brought in asylum seekers from Southeast Asia, the number was higher. But every year under the Trump administration, this number has gone down. So who are we taking in as refugees? Refugees who have been persecuted or have a well-founded fear of persecution based on religion. And then it goes on to say some other things, 5,000. Iraqi refugees with certain U.S. ties. So this has to do with translators that served during the Iraq War, and their families, 4,000. Refugees from El Salvador, Guatemala, or Honduras, 1,500 other refugees, and they got a list in here, Australia, Papua New Guinea, 7,500, which gives you a total of 18,000. Now, again, the CRC Church, Christian Reformed Church, has done a historically, been very connected to the refugee community. It's been kind of something that, I don't know if taking pride in is what we're supposed to do, but it's something that we've done well. And in this case, I would argue this is a place where the Christian Reformed Church needs to start raising its voice. Many of the organizations that serve asylum seekers and refugees are really struggling. Nobody is coming. And it has just made all of that very difficult. And again, as we think about politically what this country represents, right? Maybe imperfectly, but what we claim to represent. You would think that the asylum and refugee channel would be something that we would take seriously and seek to bring as many people in as we possibly could. All right, next slide. This gets into the article, and I don't want to read all of this with you, but I kind of talked about it a little bit. The person wrote the article in the Washington Post and was talking about how, again, well-intentioned laws, like the 1965 Immigration Reform Act, has actually led to the part of the problem on the southern border. So bear with me as I try to read some of this. It says, America's immigration policy seems to be set in some aspirational, abstract focus on the type of country we want to be, but detached from real-world considerations. Such was the case in 1965 when Congress enacted the landmark reforms to our immigration law. Though the act had noble goals of eliminating racism and prejudice from the U.S. immigration system, it was enacted without a clear understanding of how and why people migrate to the United States from particular countries, or how the anticipated congressional action might affect those patterns. And so one unintended consequence of the well-intentioned 1965 immigration reform was an unprecedented rise in illegal migration. This in turn set in motion a cycle of border enforcement that produced more rather than fewer undocumented migrants living north of the border, not to mention the toxic politics around the issue. So what happens in 1965 is because they begin to put limits on Western immigrants, people from Central America and Mexico, people who used to be able to come over, work, and go back, realized that they better stay. And so they not only stayed, but they began to bring their families. Then you get 1986 with the Reagan Act that we talked about, I think, last time, and the act that Bill Clinton passed, and you get the militarization of the border, which now means that they're coming across in places that are very dangerous. But what the article is saying is that that law has actually contributed to this idea of the illegal immigrant and the undocumented immigrants living in our country. All right, next slide. All right, it says this: the restrictive aspects of the new system fell primarily on the nations in the Western Hemisphere, where no numerical limits on legal immigration had existed. When opportunities for legal entry closed up, the previous flows of immigrants were quickly reestablished under unauthorized auspices. As a result, apprehensions along the border began to rise, signaling the rise of a new phenomenon known as illegal migration. The result was a progressive militarization of our southern border. Although little had changed in practical terms in the years after 1965, the same migrants were leaving the same communities to go to the same employers in the same U.S. states in about the same numbers. Now the migrants were illegal and hence, by definition, lawbreakers and criminals. Next slide. From 1980 to 2010, the Border Patrol budget rose 16 times, despite the fact the number of attempted undocumented entries was not itself rising. Faced with a significant risk of crossing the border after first entering the United States, Mexicans hunkered down to stay, dramatically reducing the rate of out-migration while leaving the rate of in-migration largely unaffected. As migrant workers spent more time north of the border, their spouses and children increasingly migrated to the U.S. to join them. In short, shifts in U.S. immigration policies transformed a circular flow of male workers from Mexico going to a few states into a settled population of families living in 50 states, including 11 million undocumented people. This all resulted from immigration policymaking rooted not in geographic, demographic, or economic considerations, but in America's deeper hopes and aspirations and its fears and insecurities. And I know you can't see it. Douglas Massey how a 1965 immigration reform created illegal immigration. Now, what's my point? Why do I bore you or put you to sleep by reading you from the Washington Post? Again, a well-intentioned immigration reform law that was trying to enact immigration in a way that was not racist or in ways that we had seen before, unintentionally contributes to what we now refer to as the undocumented immigrants who now live here, in part because of the militarized border that has taken place in the 1980s and the 1990s, and continues now to be this polarized political rhetoric that our politics kind of wraps itself around. All right, next slide. All right, now, the question is, what do we do about it? And I'm going to play this video. I'm hesitating because, the Office of Social Justice and maybe some of the other people that I'm connected with have a few reservations possibly about some of the things in this video. But I want to play the video because what I want us to begin thinking about, not that this is the way forward necessarily, but we as Christians have to begin thinking more creatively and politically and get engaged in this issue to see how can we change our immigration laws to make it so that legal immigration is easier. How do we allow the people that we want to come in our country to come into this country while keeping out the so-called bad people that everybody, including the immigrants, want to keep out? And it is going to take us working in a bipartisan way, Republicans and Democrats together, to come up with some kind of solution that opens up the possibility for legal immigration that is done much more easily. Okay? Now, the other thing that we have to do, and you'll see this in the video, and this is why I want to play it, we have to deal with the large number of people that are here. And I think I told you this already. When I talk on this issue, whether people are Republicans or Democrats, most of the time, nobody wants to send these people back. And how would we do it? That would be the question, right? Both of them are like, there's just no way we could do it, number one. And number two, we don't necessarily want to do it. These people have become our neighbors. They become our coworkers. They're a part of the communities that we live in. So what we have to find is a way for those who are on the wrong side of the law to get right with the law and begin thinking carefully and critically about how we might get that done. So I share this with you not as this is the way it should be done. I share this with you as one idea that begins to try to get at all of these different issues. Now, I really hope it plays. I really hope you can hear it. And if not, I'll have to talk about it. But anyway, so if you could try to play it, that would be great.
Most people think that America's immigration system is broken. There are long lines to get in, which means that our policy chooses who gets to come. But a consequence of limiting immigration is that many circumvent the system and live here in undocumented status. So what can Congress do to make immigration more sensible? Most immigrants who receive green cards get them because someone in their family is already a resident of the U.S. Family ties are important, but shouldn't trump all other priorities, like helping to fill excessive vacancies in the labor market. More slots should be allocated on the basis of our country's occupational needs. The easiest way to determine which industries and which occupations are experiencing labor shortages is to identify those with rapid wage growth. When labor demand rises relative to supply, wages go up. Green card limits could be adjusted periodically to reflect labor market conditions. Many might worry that more immigrant labor reduces wages for native-born workers. Several studies over the years demonstrate that this is not the case. One study on the massive Soviet migration to Israel revealed that immigration had at most small effects on the wages of the native-born. A study in the U.S. provides evidence that immigrants have negligible effects on the wages of those already in the country. And if there is any impact, it is primarily on the immigrants who arrived earlier. Using labor market data to determine labor market tightness will help us assure that existing workers aren't negatively impacted. What about the 11 million or so undocumented immigrants already in the country? Most Americans accept that those who have entered illegally or overstayed their visas have committed a crime. Complete amnesty would seem inappropriate and would encourage illegal entry in the future. As an alternative to deportation, however, one reasonable approach would be to fine undocumented immigrants rather than deport them. Congress should create a Z visa to be issued to undocumented immigrants who can demonstrate that on the day the bill is signed, they have been in the country for, say, 3 years or more and have no criminal record. The visa would allow them, their spouses, and children to stay, provided that they pay an annual fee of, say, a few $100s. Anyone with a Z visa could continue working while applying for a green card and paying the annual fee, but they would have to go to the back of the line, as would be the case if they were applying from their origin country. This approach neither favors nor penalizes them on their path for citizenship. In order to discourage future illegal immigration, Congress should create appropriate incentives to apply for legal status. Employer enforcement is essential to ensure that the undocumented do not choose to stay in the shadows rather than pay for the Z visa. Programs like E-Verify, where firms check to see if workers have a valid Social Security number, are necessary and should be enhanced. Firms that hire undocumented workers should be fined heavily, but should also be given safe harbor if E-Verify confirms that an applicant is permitted to work in this country. A system that penalizes employing those without legal status in the U.S. is also the best way to keep new illegal immigrants out. Immigrants who are unable to find work cannot afford to live and stay in the U.S. Now, while border enforcement is necessary and uncontroversial, it is insufficient because nearly half of all illegal immigrants entered the country legally and then overstayed their visas. Creating a system of more balanced immigration, introducing a Z visa to deal with the current population of undocumented immigrants, and adopting measures to discourage illegal entry in the future would significantly improve our immigration system.
All right, now, why do I share that video with you? First of all, the person who gave this video to me, I met with when I was down in Kansas City. This is a person who works, actually would be on the more progressive side politically, works with undocumented immigrants, and said, I'm going to send you a video that is actually more center-right in its perspective, but starts to get at some ways in which we can begin to make changes that do some of the things that we talked about maybe on the first day. Talks about border security, recognizes the importance of laws, also sees people made in the image of God, seeks human dignity, and seeks to find a way to transform the immigration system to make legal immigration easier, and find a way to help those who are considered undocumented in this country to find a way either to legal permanent residency or citizenship. I always use this example. Maybe I used it here before. I can't remember, where I've said it. I'm driving up to Minnesota, going 80 miles an hour. I get a speeding ticket. I'm on the wrong side of the law. There's a mechanism in place by which I get on the right side of the law. Right now, there is no mechanism in place for those who are here, quote unquote, illegally, to get right with the law. And we need to find a mechanism to be able to make that happen as we also seek to reform our immigration system. And I think then we allow border security to actually focus on the so-called bad people to keep them out. Now, the reason this is controversial has to do with the fact of whether or not, we would make undocumented immigrants pay a fine. And different organizations are kind of iffy about that. And so before I ever got involved in really talking about this issue, I went to some of my immigrant friends who were undocumented, and I said, how would you feel about paying a fine to get kind of right with the law. And to a person, they said, tell me where and when and how much, and I'll be there. I think it's important that we recognize there are abstract ways to talk about this issue, very idealistic ways to talk about this issue. But nothing's going to get done if we stay in our kind of idealistic towers. We have to recognize what the issues are and begin to address the issues on the ground, the real issues. And there are ways in which we can get this done. We just have to be willing to work together. I think we need to be willing to do it as a Christian community first, as our Christian identity is that which leads us first, setting aside some of our ideological things, but also being willing to engage and get involved in the political process, bringing some of these ideas, whether it's this that I just shared with you, or this video, or other ideas, to our representatives, to our senators, and making it part of the conversation. Now, what are some more practical ways that you can get involved in this? Well, so I represent two organizations, the Office of Social Justice, which many of you already know about and are already signed up for all their action alerts and all that stuff, and there's ways connected with the Office of Social Justice that we can get involved, and I'll get to that here in a minute. The first thing, though, I want to suggest to you is holding what I would call living room conversations. So the National Immigration Forum, for whom I work, wants us to try to find ways to talk to one another about immigration. Living room conversations are basically me coming to you and saying, you invite 3 people to be a part of this conversation, and then you tell them to invite 3 of their friends, or each one to invite a friend to take along. And to even think outside the box and think of who might somebody be who is on a different kind of political perspective than me. Then we gather together, not in a living room right now because of COVID, but maybe we sit out on the back deck, or maybe we do it over Zoom, and we just have an open and honest conversation about the immigration issue, trying to find ways to bridge the gap between us. So that is one very, very easy possibility. I'll even lead the discussion. You don't have to do anything. Maybe provide some coffee or lemon bars or something, right? And I'll lead the discussion. Easy way to get involved, very grassroots. Another very easy way to get involved, the Office of Social Justice is beginning to hold book groups. There is a book called The God Who Sees, written by Karen Gonzalez, who herself is an immigrant. And they are asking churches like Covenant to have a group study, a book study. Now, I don't know, is that happening?
I ordered a book and sent $14 or something, and I got an email from the person at the Office
Yeah.
of Social Justice, but I still haven't received
Okay.
the book, and that's
Been a long time. Okay. Anyway, the reason I'm looking at Dave is that he and I have been in conversation, and there may be a possibility of that book group taking place here at Covenant if you're interested. And I'll get you a book. I'll make sure it happens. All right? So, very easy. Read a book, have a conversation. All right? Third, contact your representatives. It's really easy now in this digital age to contact your representative. And what I have learned in working for the Office of Social Justice and the National Immigration Forum is those form letter things that people ask you to use, don't use them because they don't read them. What they do read are letters, emails that you write to them from the heart. They can tell it's not a form letter. They get read and they get responded to. And you can make phone calls yet in this day and age, but it's really easy to get in touch with your representative. So what are some of the things that you can talk to your representative about? 2 really kind of low-hanging fruit that I hope none of us in here would disagree with, right? A permanent status for DACA. Let's get this resolved. DACA, right? And the second one, tell them to put pressure on the president to increase the number of people we allow in through the asylum and refugee stream, right? 2 things I hope, and you can tell me that I'm wrong here in a little bit. You get the chance to talk back at me. But two things that I hope we can be in agreement on. Now, there are other things you could talk about, but those are 2 really easy ones. You can sign up for the OSJ newsletter and action alerts. So I put these little cards out there, and there's not very many of them. Even if you just pulled out a piece of paper and you were interested in the action alert, if you're not getting them, just give me your name, give me your email. I'll make sure to get you signed up. Okay? Or if you just want to email me and say, Lief, sign me up for the OSJ thing. I'm interested. I'll make sure that you get signed up. The other thing that I would put before you is signing up for the Bible's Badges and Business Principles. So I work for both organizations. In the Bible Badges and Business, we're really focusing on bringing together conversations between clergy, members of the Christian community, so not just clergy, but members of the Christian community, law enforcement, and business leaders. And there will be some events that will be kind of coming down the pike. And if you're interested in kind of hearing more about some of that stuff or to sign up for the principles, email me, say, Lief, sign me up for the BBB thing that you were talking about. I'll make sure you get signed up, or you can fill out one of those little cards that I put there. Second to last is to meet with your representatives. Right now, it's really easy to do over Zoom. You may not get to meet with the representative, but you do meet with someone from their office. You get to share your concerns with them and talk with them, and they will pass those concerns on. Oftentimes, I'm looking for people who want to be part of these conversations. And as I said to you before, nobody cares what a professor thinks about anything. They do care about what the common... I'm joking, right? But you know what I mean. When the common people from the community, business leaders, farmers, workers, right? When you speak, that's when they really start to listen. And I'm going to tell you, when conservatives speak and are beginning to speak about this, that is when Senator Grassley, Senator Ernst, and whoever is going to be our next, congressperson or senator, I guess I should say that too. That's when they listen, and they'll hear what you're saying, and you're the one who I think who can really push the issue. So meeting with your representatives. Last, I would say there's going to be a Leading the Way virtual conference on immigration. It's a national thing, but because of COVID, it's got to be online. And I've got a lot of information about that. I'm willing to send that out to you. It's an easy way to hear what kind of conversations are happening in the immigration issue, to hear some Republicans are actually thinking about this issue. So some of the people who come and are really supportive of this immigration reform push are some Senate Republicans. And we had a senator from Georgia who is ready to put a bill out for a restitution-based immigration reform if he can get enough evangelicals and people to sign their name and say, we're ready for this to happen. So whether you're on the progressive side, whether you're on the conservative side, I'm simply saying to you that we have the power as the people of this country, and as Christians, I think it's important that we raise our voices. We seek the human dignity of all people. We seek justice. We seek human flourishing. We try to cross these ideological divides with one another, find practical ways in which we can talk to one another, practical ways in which we can seek immigration reform. And as I've said, by using 1 Peter, we do so in a way that honors everybody and also honors our political process. So that is it for me. I would love to know what your questions, your comments, your arguments, your pushback, all of it, and I'll tell you what Skillen said. And anyway, I want to hear from you.
With a restitution-based approach, I've heard in terms of some of the dollar values that are actually mentioned. Are they really a possibility for a worker, or how does that take place?
Yeah, and that's, again, I want to make clear that some of the pushback for the restitution-based immigration reform focuses on that. What will that dollar amount actually be, or what will it look like? And the one that the National Immigration Forum is trying to get behind might seem rather high. But one of the things they're building into it is that a part of it can be paid for by church organizations, employers, outside groups, so that the amount that's actually paid by the person who is undocumented is not quite as steep or as high. And that would be a place where I think, again, as a Christian community, how could we get behind some of those types of efforts?
And when I think about this conversation too, one of the things we haven't really hit on here is the financial. I mean, when I hear the conversation broadly, there's a lot of discussion about the financial implications and how immigrants are benefiting from a system that they're not paying into and all this kind of thing. And I just wonder, the other thing that people often talk about then, which they seem sort of counter to each other, people talk about all of the money that gets sent out of this country by people who are working here and their families are in other countries. And I'm just curious about the balance of those two things. Like, it seems to me that in some part, if families were here, those families would be spending that money in the United States, contributing to our economy. So we're talking a lot about the legal implications, but I think the financial implications are equally large for a lot of people.
Yep.
And I'm curious about the economic analyses, I guess, and also the larger sort of, even what he hinted at, which was they're tracking labor prices to identify these labor shortages, and then the implication is that if they come in, it won't affect those wages, but yet you're bringing them in because of the shortage. It seemed like he made an argument directly against himself within about 2 sentences.
Oh, I don't think so. And again, the video is much more of a, here's an idea, let's kind of think about it. But I hope all of us in this room would agree that bringing everything above board would be is a positive win-win for everyone involved. There are so many tangential issues that you begin to hit on, sex trafficking, labor trafficking, all kinds of bad things that happen because all of this is below board. And it will also force businesses to pay people fair wages. And I think that's important. And, one of the things, too, that I think it's important for us to think about is, and this is something Skillen said in his email, is we can't just think about the economy of the United States. That how do we become a people who have a global perspective to see that, bringing in workers, bringing things above board, and so what if money may be going to these other places? Or how do we seek a politic that has a global perspective that could help some of these countries find stability, which is not there. And so I just think bringing all of this above board is beneficial for everybody across the board, if that makes sense. And would think that we as Christians would be seeking that. Hopefully that made sense. Yeah.
Just to add, to what you just said, I've been reading lately how much climate change is affecting agriculture in those countries to the south of us. It's going to be affecting agriculture and is affecting agriculture in our country too, probably even in our county. But that is only going to get worse, and so it's a problem that we're really going to have to deal with more and more as people come close.
Yeah, and as we think about climate change, who does it affect? It affects the poor more so than anyone else. And again, as we think about push-pull factors, and that's something we didn't necessarily get deep into the weeds on, but there's the pull factor of, coming to the United States is this shining, place where we can come and freedom and so on. But the push factors are there as well, violence, and then you bring in climate change and what's happening in some of these countries. It's impacting the poor. So our politic needs to be global and creational. I don't think it's wrong to say that.
I'm just wondering, in the first place, well, I have two questions. Are all undocumented immigrants from Central America? Or,
yeah.
okay, we don't talk, I mean, I haven't heard them from Europe and from Africa and so forth. And then my second question is, how did you get involved in this and so passionate about it?
You know the answer to the second question. The answer to the first question is no, they're not. And, you know, we have Canadian people who are probably here as undocumented immigrants. You remember Mark Verbruggen? He was an undocumented immigrant for a little while. We had to send him back until he got his papers straightened out. So no, absolutely not. And one of the things that's important to recognize is that a large chunk of the people who are undocumented in this country are people who came in legally through visas, and then they just they overstayed their visas. So it's important for us to recognize that. But what we're dealing with here is a southern border issue. And I think that takes up so much of our time and energy because of the crisis that's at the southern border. And I think for the way in which, and that's why I wanted to include that article, the way in which that's kind of come about, and some of the ways in which good-intentioned laws have actually had negative consequences, unintended consequences. And so while the immigration issue is a broader issue than just, you know, Central America, South America, or Mexico, I think because of what's happening on the southern border, that's taking up our attention. How did I get involved in immigration? We bought a trampoline. That's how I got involved in immigration. Increasingly, my neighbors are Guatemalan, and we put up a trampoline in our backyard, and it attracts kids. And so Omar is my next door neighbor, little Lindsay across the street, Leslie, her sister. I'm trying to remember her brother's name. Little sister Genesis is a real cutie, although she's constantly playing by the road, which makes me really anxious. But they were just over at my house all the time. And when OSJ was looking for someone to get involved in this issue of immigration, I was actually trying to get somebody else to do it. I was going to some of my students and some of my former students and trying to get them to get involved, and I got no. And then finally I'm like, fine, I'll do it. I got involved at OSJ in part because of trying to think about the issue from my perspective of my literal neighbor, and then I got involved with the National Immigration Forum. So I do not speak Spanish. I wish I did, and the kids make fun of me all the time because I don't speak Spanish, and they try to get me to say Spanish words, and it comes off making me look ridiculous. So.
What happens to money? So presumably a dairy farmer has to have a Social Security number. So from his perspective, he's still taking out Social Security for a fake Social Security number or something.
Yeah.
It goes into a system somewhere.
Yeah.
But presumably that person isn't going to get a Social Security check.
No.
So
by the way, can I quick add on to what you're saying? That's one of the reasons why some people are really opposed to, or not opposed, but are balking at this restitution. It's like,
what is the number, by the way? Like, I mean, are we talking like $10,000?
Yeah. I think I've heard anywhere from $10,000 to $14,000. Okay. Yeah.
But so I guess my question is, what is, there's this perception or conversation about those illegals are mooching off of our system. Is that
No.
In terms of like they're saying public school and healthcare?
Yeah. So they're using, they're not. I mean, that is really not true. I mean, they are contributing to a system in which most of the time they're not benefiting from in a financial sense.
They're not getting taxes back, right?
Right. And what they would argue is that our public institutions, education, healthcare, that kind of stuff. And they would say that is where that financial burden comes in. And even the idea of welfare, I mean,
I was going to say,
if you consider WIC or food stamps, like making sure people get a meal, welfare, but not welfare as in...
Do they qualify for WIC? And other...
That's a great question. I'm not exactly sure, but I think some of those programs with women and children and things like that, I'm not sure many questions get asked. So someone might say, oh, there we go. But when we talk about welfare in these kind of bigger levels, they're not able to benefit from those. And so again, I think that's important. How do we bring all that stuff above board? Yeah. Yeah. People say, and that's one of the reasons why so many people push back against immigrants, right? Because it's like, well, we have this welfare system, and everyone's going to, try to mooch off the government. And it's like, well, most of the immigrants that I know, if they could get these benefits, wouldn't even take them because there's a pride issue there. I'm not saying that's everybody, but
I was just going to speak briefly into having been a recipient of WIC. It's surprisingly complicated, and I'm an educated person.
yeah,
And so just the address and the amount of accountability that you have to be at certain meetings at certain times to get your checks, it's not a simple system.
No.
And so I think anyone who has a language barrier also, that becomes even more
yes,
challenging, and having instability in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
shifts that aren't convenient to getting to an appointment.
yeah,
But I also wanted to bring up the coyotes too.
Yeah.
I've just read a number of books about immigrant stories where they also, so much of the money they're sending back is just the amount of money
Yeah.
with lots of interest
Yep.
that they had just to get here, and then there's just a
And
disconnect.
And you're putting,
Yeah.
again, I'm sure some of you know people here in this very community who have had to hire a coyote to come over. And when you talk to them, you realize, first of all, you're paying a lot of money, and you are putting your life into the hands of someone you have no idea. And they're taking you through places that are just horrific. And again, it's an unintended consequence of that 1965, law. And I want to come back to WIC just for a minute. Maybe this is going to get me in trouble, and I've had a long weekend, so maybe I should have rested a little more before I got up here to talk. Are we really opposed to women and infants getting food? We really? Is that kind of how far we've come? Is that these women and little Lindsay and Genesis, no, they shouldn't, get their bananas. I would hope as a Christian community. Now, we might say, well, maybe it's not the government's role. Fine, but then what are we doing about it? That's what ticks me off about the Christian community. It's like, oh, it's not the government's role. Then what are we doing? What are we doing to address this issue? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So fine, let's do something. And there are things that we can do. So this is the thing. I'm fired up now. I get all this. I go into churches, I go into places, and I get cynicism. And I've had it with cynicism. I've had it. Either get off your rear ends and start doing something, starting small, or just shut up about it, right? And so anymore, if somebody comes to me and wants to raise all of these well, done with you, I'm moving on, right? I think we got to have a conversation across ideological lines. Yes, absolutely. You start throwing up all these excuses for why you shouldn't get involved with your immigrant neighbors, sorry. I'm moving on to the next group. And I don't care if they're libertarians, Republicans, socialists, communists, whatever. I'm moving on to the next group.
I'm trying to remember the 3 points in the film. I just think that way sometimes. So one is finding who is illegal, and if they are criminals or not.
Mm-hmm.
That was one. 2, if they've been here 3 years or
I think
longer.
they said 3 years.
3
no
years.
criminal record.
Right,
Yeah.
they get a visa and
Yeah.
they pay a fine.
They pay a fine.
All right, what was the third? Were that 2 and 3?
Redoing the system
Okay.
so that it is fair, it's easier to come through legal channels. And again, that's a center-right organization, so for them too, they're going to say, of course, border security is a non-negotiable, but let's use border security to keep out the real bad people.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So what if they've been here 6 months illegally?
Yeah,
Then
no.
what? Then what?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question.
I'm thinking of all my neighbors right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And that's why, again, for me, this video was more of a conversation starter. I would still say, personally, how can we find a way to help them get right with the law? Because I remember last time you talked about how some of them get duped. They get here and they're like, whoa, all right, how do we help put in mechanisms to help them get right with the law? And there are ways I think we can get this done, and ways that we can begin the process of working towards it. If we're willing to put the hard work in. Yeah. And I think this type of thing with the video or the restitution base, what is good about it is it addresses these issues that move across the ideological spectrum, right? So when I talk to conservatives about this, I can see their, and I say, no, we're not against border security, and yes, we need to maintain our borders, but we want to make sure we're keeping the bad people out. Let's find, and then I see them relax, right? And then on the progressive side, you're talking about finding a way for either legal permanent residency or citizenship, where you have a group of people who now are above board and are able to live with dignity and get jobs and go to college, and right, and so. Again, it just goes across the board, and it's addressing reality. That's the thing. It's addressing the real complicated issues. So.
Two more questions, I guess, and then we should probably conclude.
Yeah, you haven't mentioned at all parental separation from
sure.
children.
Yeah, well,
and
I would hope. Listen, I've been speaking boldly here tonight, and I would hope that we're all on board that separating kids at the border and giving women hysterectomies, I would sure hope that as pro-life people, I'm pro-life, I'm assuming you guys are all pro-life. To me, that's not even worth talking about, because it should be just a given that we're not, and that's where the Obama administration needs to take some heat for that too.
I was going to say, they separated parents and children also.
Yes.
And then Trump to a much greater degree.
That's right.
But
it's
and I don't know if it's still happening. That was my real question.
Well, right now, the National Immigration Forum is really trying to hunt down, there's hotel chains that are being used to house children who've been separated from their families. And so it's still happening. There are still kids who are separated from their families. And the National Immigration Forum and some other organizations, there's one organization called Welcome that really focuses on speaking on the immigration issue with evangelical women. And the whole point is to really get some moms pissed off, because you start talking about kids getting separated at the borders and hysterectomies and things like that. And so there is this push to even try to name some of these hotels where you have that are housing some of these children. So the reason I didn't spend any time on it is, to me, I would hope that's a given, that shouldn't be happening, regardless of what administration you're supporting. Yeah.
I guess thinking about this too, you mentioned these time frames for legal immigration versus visas, even like the different visas, and I'm just sort of, why does it take 6 years, right? In some cases, or 14 years or whatever, and then you sort of think about, what are we willing to invest in making that system more agile, versus what we're willing to invest in kicking people out or enforcing, assuming a lot of the people who are here, we actually want here, why would we not invest more in simply making sure that they can get here legally, and invest less in policing borders and policing the system in general?
Or focusing on, border security that's sensible, recognizing that most of the drugs are coming in through our ports, and aren't coming in through these immigrants crossing the desert. Most of them are coming in our ports. So let's find sensible ways to have border security. Yeah. And as far as the time, you're talking about a backlog in a legal system, and again, how do we fix the system itself so that it's quicker, goes faster, and makes those channels work better, and find ways to make those channels work better. I mean, the reality is we are, again, whether you're Republican or Democrat, we're moving towards a global world. We are. And these protectionist, approaches may work for a little while, but the reality is we're moving towards a global world. And how do we as a country, as a Christian people, embrace that? And how do we find positive ways to welcome that and work towards that? And I think a big part of it is seeking justice in a lot of ways. So I did promise that I would talk about Skillen's email. It was really long, so I'm not going to read it to you. But he was pretty excited to send me a big, long email. He talked about principled pluralism, and he said, if you go back in the history of our country, specifically, before the Civil War and so on, there was a lot of, he would say there was a lot of attempts to live out this principled pluralism. But what he more wanted me to communicate to you is that he doesn't necessarily see our politics today necessarily fulfilling a principled pluralism, but that we as a Christian community should be seeking this principled pluralism as we speak into the political system. So, and by the way, greetings to you from Jim Skillen.
Well, thank you so much, Jason. We really appreciate it, especially coming after a trip up north to come down here with us.
I'm sorry I said the word pissed, by the way. I realize where I am now. I'm standing up here by the pulpit, so I'm sorry.
I think you're forgiven.
Oh, thank you. I will take that as official from the Domini.
All right, and so I'll offer a prayer. Did anybody choose a song to conclude? And maybe we'll do the doxology. Somebody who can sing well can.
Let me say this really quick before you pray.
Yeah.
If you're interested in this stuff, send me an email and I'll get you signed up to some different things. If you want to do a living room conversation, let me know and I'll get it set up. And hopefully, Dave, we can get the book group going. That would be a wonderful thing. I'll make sure that happens. All right. Sorry.
Let's pray. Gracious God, we thank you for the conversation that we could have tonight. And we thank you again for Jason and how his loving relationships with his neighbors have led him into this call in his life. Thank you for the light he is illumined for us. Help us to sense where you're leading us on this. And we do pray for every member of the human family. Again, that we can recognize your image, that we can encourage flourishing, show the love that you have for them, and that we can put this into flesh and blood form through laws, through what is just and right, and makes for the peace that you want. So we pray that your Spirit will take the word you've planted and grow it into fruit in our lives. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. How about if we stand up and maybe Jill and Terry, can you start us off in the doxology tonight as well?